Hey everyone, today I'll be going over the Cubeshape Parity method, or CSP, for the Square-1 puzzle. General information about this method, like what it is and whether you should learn it, will be posted in the description below. For the entire video, I'll be using the standard Square-1 color scheme, with black on top and white on bottom. The idea of CSP is that you plan how to solve Cubeshape and how to solve parity simultaneously during the inspection period. I'm going to split the CSP inspection process into two phases, determining the parity in the cube and ultimately determining your solution. Determining parity seems like a complex step, but it's not too bad once you get the hang of it. At the end of this step, you will end up with a number between 0 and 6, which will indicate whether the cube has odd or even parity. Once you recognize what cube shape you have, you need to recall the order in which you look at pieces. This will make more sense later on, but basically we need to examine specific sequences of pieces, and using orders will make this process linear. Remembering your order for each cube shape is actually really easy if you have a general system for each case. For me, I start at a piece that sticks out to me, like this edge, and go clockwise until I reach the end. And be sure to use the same order every time you get a recurring cube shape. For example, every time you get scallop, you should be looking at the same order of pieces every time, whether the scallop looks like this or looks like this. For this main example, I'll be using scallop, so I'm going to show you my order. I start at this edge piece and then go clockwise, and then on the bottom, start at the same piece and go clockwise. For corners, I start at this corner, go clockwise, and then start at this corner and go clockwise. This order is the most natural to me, which is why I use it, but if it's not as intuitive for you, you can make up your own orders. Once you understand the order and how you're processing the pieces, we want to look for certain things in the scramble. So you have a mental checklist of 6 items, and you want to know how many of these items the scramble checks off. These 6 items are parity in the black and white edges, black and white corners, and parity in the edge position and corner positions. So let's walk through exactly how I do this with this scramble. We first look at the black edges to determine parity. We only need to examine the first 3 in our order. So that would be green, orange, blue. This color combination I know is parity. And how do I know this? So there are 24 different 3-color combinations in total, and I know the 12 that correspond to parity and the 12 that don't, and I memorize the fact that green, orange, blue just fall under parity. However, you don't have to brute force memorize these color sequences, and I don't recommend that you do. There's a more simple breakdown to know that this color sequence is parity, and I'm crediting this part of the video to Cubemaster, who originally explained it. The idea is to reduce the 3-color combination to a more manageable 2 non-opposite colors. To do this, we need to identify where the 2 opposite colors are within the 3, and eliminate one of them. These opposite colors can be the first 2, the last 2, or the first and the last. Whenever they are the first 2, eliminate the middle color, and keep the first and last colors. Whenever they are the last 2, eliminate the last color and keep the first 2 colors. Whenever they are the first and the last, eliminate the first color and keep the last 2 colors. The last thing you need to memorize is which 2 colors are parity. All you need to know is that blue and orange means parity, and green and red also means parity. Any color combination other than these means no parity. So looking at the green, orange, blue color combination in the black edges, we see the opposite colors are the first and the last, so we eliminate the green. We are left with orange and blue, which indicates parity. So since we know that the black edges do have parity with the green, orange, blue color combination, I'm going to mentally check off in my head that, we're counting 1. Next, for white edge parity, we apply the same process as black, but we look at the white edges. So that would be red, blue, orange, which I also know is parity, so we're going to count 2. Sometimes I do just hold up fingers like this to help me remember, but I also put it on the screen so you can follow along. So next we look at the black corners. So I look at the color exactly clockwise to the black or white piece. So that would be red, green, orange, which I know isn't parity, so we're still at 2. Next we look at the white corners. So that would be green, red, orange, and I know that is parity, so I'm going to increment by 1, so that would be 3. That we have so far. So for edge position parity, I hone in on the positions of the black edges. So that would be 1, 2, 4, and 7 for this scramble. And if there's an odd number of black edges in either the even or odd positions, there is parity. That might sound kind of confusing, but if we again take a look at the positions of these edges, there's 2 black edges in even positions and 2 black edges in odd positions. So since either number of black edges in even or odd positions are even, there's no parity. And then if we look at the corners here, the black corners are in the positions 2, 3, 7, and 8. So 2 and 8, that's 2 corners in the even positions, and 3 and 7, that's 2 corners in the odd positions. So once again, there's no parity because those are both even numbers. Just to see the other side of the coin, I'm going to introduce this scramble. So let's look at the edge position parity on this scramble. Looking at the black edges, we see that it's in position 2, 5, 6, and 8. So that's 3 edges in even positions, 2, 6, and 8, and 1 in the odd position. So since these numbers are odd, this does have parity. And for corner position parity, looking at the black corners, we see that they're in positions 2, 4, 5, and 6. And that's 3 corners in even positions and 1 corner in an odd position. So since those numbers are odd, this would also have parity. We would count those on our mental checklist had it been this scramble. But the real scramble didn't have parity for either of those position parities, so we're still left with 3. So once you have the number of items checked off, you just need to consider whether this number is odd or even. This conclusion will lead us to the next phase, determining your solution. So for this scramble, we determined the cube has odd parity. There's a misconception that odd parity refers to the worst solution, but there's no correlation there. Odd and even are simply counterparts and they don't mean more than that. So for each cube shape, you do have to memorize both the odd and even solutions. For scallop, odd, assuming that you use my order and everything, it would just be the standard way to solve scallop. Now let's just say that the scramble had even parity. In that case, the way you would solve scallop is you would shift the scallop like this, and then do a slice. And that actually swaps the parity in one move. And then you just go on and solve it normally. Okay, so now that you know scallop, you're probably wondering, how will I know how to trace the rest of the cube shapes? How will I know the solutions for odd and even for all the cube shapes? Well, I actually got you covered here because I curated this website which shows every single cube shape and each solution, including the orders for every single case that I use. So we have these reference images here. I'm showing the starting and ending piece for the top and bottom. And then, like I said before, I always go clockwise, so you should be able to fill in the rest. Also, the bottom reference image is an X2 away, if that was confusing. However, if you don't like my order, that's totally fine. You can make up whatever order you want. It's just that the odd and even might not correspond the same way. And you just have to figure that out yourself, but it's pretty easy. But I still strongly recommend using the solutions I provided here because I think they're really good. Obviously, don't memorize the algs that are provided here. Just slowly walk through the alg that I provided and see how it's solving the cube shape. See how odd and even differ. That's like the most important thing. I even highlighted in the alg where exactly you're switching parity just to make that difference very clear. So for example, this first case right here, the key difference between odd and even is that for odd you go into scallop, and for even you go into shield. So you should just remember that fact rather than the alg or anything like that. And then for actually learning order, you might be wondering, where do I branch out first after learning scallop? And I strongly recommend doing highest probability. You want to learn the cases that are most likely to pop up so you can apply cube shape parity as soon as possible. All the cases are pretty much the same difficulty and how hard or easy they are to learn, so yeah, there's really no reason to not go the highest probability route. I also want to shout out this resource called Square-1 made by Mika V. It's a really helpful tool for learning CSP because it's essentially a cube shape parity trainer, so you can select a case that you know and then just generate those scrambles. And that way you can just practice within the cases that you know. There's also a bunch of other really crazy tools here that you can look through. This helped me a lot when I was learning CSP, so I highly recommend that you check it out. Okay, so next I want to go over stars because they're pretty interesting. So here's an example of a star, and you actually simply switch parity just by doing a 2 on the bottom or a -2, just basically turning this face. One thing that you do have to keep in mind though is that doing a Y2 actually switches parity. If you think about it, a Y2 is just a U2 D2, and doing a D2 with a star is doing 3 of these 2 moves, which is therefore switching parity. So you actually have to be aware of like how you're rotating the cube when you do stars, because you can actually unintentionally switch parity. Right, so for mirrors, mirrors are actually pretty easy to implement. Tracing wise, you could do the same exact thing that you do on a normal cube. So like if I start here with edges on this normal case, for this mirror, I typically just start on the bottom, and this is my starting position, and then I continue up here. Same thing with corners. And for a lot of cases, you can actually even start at the top if you're naturally inclined to do so. So like I could start here, 1, 2, and then continue on the bottom. I typically just start on the face where there's more edges. For a case like kite shield, technically this is a mirror, but I personally just start tracing at the top because it feels intuitive for me to do so. But yeah, it's pretty free range in terms of like where you want to start for mirrors. And then for actually solving mirrors, as long as you know generally how odd and even parity differentiate, you should be able to do mirrors very easily. So for this case, both of these cubes have odd parity. I know that for odd parity, you would attach this pair with this L to make pawn pawn, as opposed to this pair. So it would be like this. And then for this mirror, so I know that this pair would equate to this pair, therefore this would be the solution. Let's make a paw paw there. So as long as you clearly know the difference between the odd and even parity, it should be pretty easy to apply the mirrors. So to close out this video, I'll be giving some general tips about tracing and learning CSP. So for tracing, I talked about the 6 things that you have to look for in the scramble, but you actually don't have to do it in the order that I provided. I generally personally stick to that order, but I often do interchange between doing black edges and white edges first, and then also black corners and white corners first. But in general, I do stick to doing edge parity first, then corner parity, then edge position parity, and then corner position parity, and that's just the system that works best for me. Next, I also want to talk about edge position and corner position parity, because that step is something that a lot of people are still confused with and have trouble understanding. It might take a while at first to kind of figure out what you're doing with that step, but as you practice more, I promise that like it will become second nature to recognize whether these have parity or not, because there are certain patterns that you can look for that you'll automatically know that, oh yeah, that's parity in the edge positions, that's not. So like for example, this scramble right here, if we look at the black edges, we see there's a pair here and a pair here, so that's 2 sets of pairs, and that's a sign that there's automatically no parity because odd, even, even number for both. And then if we look at this scramble, if we look at the black edges here, so it's almost 4 consecutive edges, but it's 1 off. So that's a sign to me that it's automatically parity in the edge position, because that's 3 odds and 1 even. And lastly, the way you should go about learning CSP and practicing it is I recommend just learning maybe a couple of cases, maybe just 1 case. Scallop is what I recommend to start off with. But once you learn scallop, just honestly spam practice this case, and then you'll get better at, doing the color sequences. You'll be better at detecting edge position and corner position parity. And that's like the most important thing that you need to get down for CSP, is just doing the tracing quick enough, under 15 seconds in inspection. You should definitely prioritize getting those skills down than like actually learning the most amount of cases, because learning a bunch of cases, it's going to be useless if you don't know how to trace fast enough. I did the exact same thing when I first learned it. I just like did this a bunch of times and timed my inspection. Maybe it took me like 15 to 20 seconds to trace or something. I branched out a little bit and learned a couple more cases, and then from there just keep practicing. Make sure to implement it in your solves, obviously. Also, if you mess up CSP in one of your solves, I do really recommend like going back and seeing what you did wrong, because you can learn a lot just from seeing what your mistakes were. Like I still do this all the time, honestly, because I mess CSP up still like more than I'd like to, so I still go back and see, what did I do wrong there? Did I mistrace? Did I just get the parity wrong? It's important to know. But yeah, those are really all the tips that I have for you guys. I really hope this helped you guys. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and good luck learning CSP.